Great day, grade 4 student. Once again, this is our scientific class with Miss Shara. For our work plan today, we'll have science bits, eat or be eaten, discussion, and thumbnail. Now for our science bits today, let us hone our naturalist intelligence and look at what is happening around us. Did you know that NASA's much-awaited Perseverance rover has successfully landed on Mars? Enclosed in a capsule, the rover took 7 months to reach the red planet. Since Mars is so far away, signals take about 14 minutes to reach the planet. Hence, the rover had to land all by itself using artificial intelligence. As NASA says, there were 7 minutes of terror while the rover was landing on Mars. Traveling at 13,000 miles per hour, the rover had to come to rest in just 7 minutes. To achieve that, NASA engineers laid out a perfectly engineered sequence. The sequence was governed by more than 500,000 lines of computer codes. Even the slightest error could have crushed the rover on the Martian surface. The first thing to slow down the capsule was the Martian atmosphere. As the speedy capsule entered the atmosphere, it created a substantial aerodynamic drag. The temperature of the heat shield reached about 1,600 degrees. The problem with the Martian atmosphere is that it's just 1% of the Earth's atmosphere. This thin atmosphere could not slow down the rover beyond the specific limit. Hence, NASA engineers built a large parachute to reduce its speed. Once the parachute was deployed, the heat shield fell to reduce the weight. The parachute slowed down the rover to 200 miles per hour, still too fast to soft land on Mars. Just moments away from making contact, the rover now had an unimportant task. It had to search for a perfect location to land in the Jezero crater. With its rocket booster turned on, the rover could not get too close to the surface. That's because the rockets would create a dust storm that could damage the rover. To overcome this problem, NASA engineers came up with a brilliant idea. Called Sky Crane Maneuver, the landing stage hovered about 20 meters above the ground. It lowered the rover with a 21-feet heater to achieve a perfect soft landing. The job wasn't done yet. There was one crucial task left. The landing stage had to fly off to a safe distance from the rover to avoid a collision. With this, Perseverance has become the sixth rover to land on the red planet. The 2020 Mars mission also comprises a small helicopter called Ingenuity. This will be the first time a helicopter would fly on Mars. The rover will also collect samples that will be retrieved in future Mars missions. Besides that, the rover will convert carbon dioxide into oxygen. This will help future human crewed missions to Mars. As isn't that amazing? So we have this saying, all civilization become either spacefaring or extinct. So we are looking on exploring outside territory, outside the Earth's territory. So now we have information about Mars. Right, from Mars, now let's go back to Earth. What can you say about the picture? If you will look at it, there's a lot of farmers. Questions, food. Where does it come from? Have you ever wondered why we can't seem to feed the world's hungry? It's a complex issue, but it might surprise you to learn that it's not because there isn't enough food. Current agricultural capacity, based on current technology, exists to feed as many as 10 billion people. The Earth's population is only about 7 billion. The big question really is, if we want to feed everyone, what would everyone need to eat? So who will eat whom? And what are the foods that we want to eat, or what kind of foods these people wants to eat? Farmers provide access to food. Many people enjoy an abundant food supply thanks to farmers' hard work. But how can you develop greatness and thankfulness towards farmers who works hard and cultivate variety of food for us? I'll show you some. So these are some ways to support local farmers. So let's buy produce directly from farmers. We can join the community supported agriculture. We can eat at a farm or restaurant that supplies organic plants. Okay? We can also stand with them, spread the word about the farmers. We can promote the local products that is the farmers are selling. So support locally made products. Their gain is your gain. Push for local. So the farmers are very much appreciated. We need to appreciate them because they are the ones cultivating or planting the food that we need to eat. Since we are talking about food, what kind of food we want to eat, let us read our learning target for today. Let me read it for you. I can differentiate a food chain from a food web. I can illustrate an energy pyramid. So what is a food chain? Food chains show how food passes from one living thing to another. Eat or be eaten. Let us start with the plant. So the farmers plant plants. Plants are producers. They turn energy from the sun into sugars that animals can use. So this is very important. Plants. All food chains and webs start with the sun. So the sun is the source of all the energy on the earth. Since the plant is important and plant gets the energy from the sun to make their own food. So all food chains and web starts with the sun. Let's look at a food chain. A food chain is a simplified way to look at the energy that passes from producers to consumer. A food chain is a flow of energy from a green plant, which is a producer, to an animal, which is a consumer, and to another animal, and so on. So in this lesson, we are going to talk about food chains and food webs in the environment. What does a food chain show us? A food chain shows us a series of living things that depend on each other for food energy. Now, if you will look at the diagram, there is an arrow. So an arrow is a representation of who is being eaten and who is eating. So the end of the arrow shows the one that is being eaten. And then the pointed arrow here is the one that is eating. So eat or be eaten. A food chain shows us the relationship between the animals and plants in a habitat. A food chain shows us the way energy flows through a habitat. What are the features of a food chain? There are usually 3 or 4 organisms in a food chain. Each of these organisms in a food chain is called a link. These links make a food chain. Food chains usually start with a producer or a green plant. This is the link where energy from the sun enters the food chain. So it always starts with a producer. A food chain can be a composition of two or three links. So in the first example, you look at the diagram from a producer, a plant, rat, and owl. So a three-link food chain. The second diagram, we have the carrots, rabbit, fox, and lion. So the carrots is being eaten by the rabbit. The fox eat the rabbits. The lion eat the fox. So this is a four-linked food chain. We also have a five-linked food chain. So from the grass, which is the producer, a plant, and then the grasshopper will eat the grass. The frog will eat the grasshopper. The python will eat the frog. And the eagle will eat the python. So a five-linked food chain and so on. So we can have six or seven. It's up to the chain. So based from the diagrams that we have seen, what is in a food chain? Who eats whom? So it is composed of three links: producers, consumers, and decomposer. Decomposer is also a consumer, but we separate it because it has a very important role in the environment. So what is a producer? Let's talk about it. A green plant should always be in the first link of a food chain. Green plants are the only organisms that can directly get the sun's energy and make their own food through a process called photosynthesis. So that's why it starts with the sun. No? Photosynthesis needs the sun. Plants are producers. They make their own food, which creates energy for them to grow, reproduce, and survive. Being able to make their own food makes them unique. They are the only living things on earth that can make their own source of food energy. Of course, they require sun, water, and air to thrive. So the basic needs of plants. They even needs soil for the nutrients. Next is the consumers. So consumers are animals of an ecological food chain that consumes other organisms. So that means they cannot make their own food. They need to find food to eat. Consumers consist of four categories. We have the primary consumers. These animals and insects eat primary producers. So these are the animals that eat plants. They feed on plants. They are called herbivores. Okay? Organisms will receive their food and energy through the process of photosynthesis. Next is the secondary consumers. These organisms eat primary consumers. There are two types, carnivores and omnivores. The next one is the tertiary consumer. They eat secondary consumers, sometimes both secondary and primary consumers. They are also known as the apex predator because it is at the top of the food chain. They consume energy from all other labels. Now let's talk about the three types of consumers. Consumers. We have the herbivores, the carnivores, and the omnivores. I mentioned a while ago that decomposer is also one type of consumer, But we are going to talk about them separately, and they are included in the food chain because they do an important task. So what is that? Let's find out later. So teacher, what is herbivores? Herbivores means animals that eat plants or consumers that eat plants. A herbivore is an animal or insect that only eats vegetations such as grasses, fruits, leaves, vegetables, roots, and bulbs. Okay, so herbivores only eat things that needs photosynthesis to live. So if you will look at the pictures, these are the animals that are herbivores. We have zebra, elephant, rabbit, cow, giraffe. The next type of consumer is carnivores. So these animals eat other animals. Example of carnivores are lion, tiger, crocodile, chameleon, snake. So they eat meat. Another type of consumer is omnivores. So that means omni means both. No, they can eat both plants and animals. So they can eat plants and other animals, just like hen that eats, look, okay, corn and worm, pig, bear, and us humans also are omnivores, consumers. Right, these are other types of consumer. So the three major types is herbivore, carnivores, and omnivores. But there are also other types of consumer. These are the scavengers. Scavengers are included as the second consumers on a food chain, but they contribute to decomposition. They include vultures, catfish, wedge-tailed eagles, dingoes, jackals, and crows. What do they do? No, if you are going to ask me, they are carnivores who feed on the bodies of dead organisms, which means they eat both dead animals and dead plants. Once a scavenger is done, the decomposer takes over. Okay, so these are the animals that helps in the decomposition. Well, the next one is the decomposer. They consume or eat dead plants and animals and decompose them, reduces them to simpler forms of matter. Okay, I mentioned again and again that decomposers are important. Why? Without decomposers, all the raw materials of life would remain waste, and the remaining bodies of dead organisms will pile up. So that wouldn't be good for our environment because those remains would rot and produce odors. Decomposers break down those wastes and those dead organisms and return the raw materials to the ecosystems. Examples of decomposers are bacteria, mushrooms, fungi, even worms. Okay, algae, lichens. Yan. Those are the animals that break down dead bodies of plants and animals and let the essential nutrients in the dead matter mix with the ecosystem again so that no waste would pile up. So that's why decomposers are very important. The scavengers and decomposer helps or work together to decompose the dead matters. So these are examples of decomposers. Even snails, ants. Okay, yan, mushrooms. Okay, so that examples are the land food chain. But the food chain won't stop there. Let's have a look at the ocean. Do you think food chain exists under the ocean? Of course, yes. There are underwater food chain. Now let's look at the underwater food chain. Food chains work in the same way in the sea, but the plants and animals look a bit different. So if you will look at the bottom, there are algae, and then we have krills, and then we have Arctic cod, ridge seal, and polar bear. Of course, the animals under the oceans are the ocean animals. Okay, so it's only the plants and animals that look a bit different, but the food chain still the same. It starts with a plant or a producer, and then consumer, and then decomposer.
Oh, I did not see you there. Hello, my name is Leroy. Today I'm going to show you an example of a food chain. But first, we need to go for a little swim. Meet me in the water. Hey, thanks for coming. Now let's get started. First, you should know that it all starts with the sun. The sun gives energy to primary producers. What is a primary producer, you ask? A primary producer is any green plant or any various microorganisms that can convert light energy or chemical energy into organic matter. That process is called photosynthesis. In other words, producers are organisms that can produce their own food. In this food chain, the primary producer is phytoplankton. But what is an organism that can produce its own food? The answer is a consumer. Consumers are organisms that have to feed on other organisms to obtain nutrients. See, the phytoplankton is getting eaten by zooplankton. That means zooplankton is a consumer. But because they're the organisms that eat the primary producer, they're technically the primary consumer. Next up the food chain is the mackerel. Mackerel eats the zooplankton, making it a secondary consumer. Oh, look! It's swimming away! Let's follow it to see what happens next. Uh-oh! That big tuna fish is eating the mackerel. That makes the tuna fish the tertiary consumer. Can you guess what the next consumer will be? That's right! The quaternary consumer is a seal. Oh no! Look! It's a shark and it just ate the seal. Can you think of any animals that will eat the shark? Can't think of any? That's because the shark is the apex predator, which means it is the top level consumer. Yup, we've reached the end of our food chain. So let's review. First, the phytoplankton gets its energy from the sun, making it a producer. Then, the phytoplankton gets eaten by zooplankton, a primary consumer. And the zooplankton gets eaten by mackerel, the secondary consumer. Then, the mackerel gets eaten by a tuna fish, the tertiary consumer. Next, the tuna fish is consumed by a seal until finally we've reached our apex predator, the shark.
In most habitats, there are several food chains. What will happen if these food chains are linked together? So these are linked together to form a food web. What is a food web? A more realistic way of looking at the relationship of plants and animals in an environment. Several food chains linked together. A predator from one food chain may be linked to the prey of another food chain. So this food web is an interconnection from one to another. Combination of many food chains. How is a food web different from a food chain? Food webs can be very complex. Food availability may vary seasonally or by time of day. An organism, like a mouse, might play two roles, eating insects on occasion, making it a secondary consumer, but also dining directly on plants, making it a primary consumer. So a food web of who eats who might look something like this. This is a food web. Who eats whom? The interconnection of many food chain. So the corn eaten by the grasshopper, the frog will eat the grasshopper, and then the python will eat the frog. Okay? And then the grasshopper will be eaten by the rat. Okay? Can be eaten by the wolf. The wolf can be eaten by the eagle. So this is like the arrows are in different directions. Whereas in food chain, the arrows are in one direction. So a food web is a type of food network with several interlinked food chains in a habitat. In nature, the food chains are not as direct as we've seen them in our discussion. The food chains are highly cross-linked or connected and highly complicated. In any habitat, there may be many kinds of animals that feed on the same plants, and may be many predators that feed on the same kinds of prey. Therefore, there will be several food chains in any habitats. So these food chains are interlinked and they form food networks in the habitat. So that is the food web. We say a while ago that food chain is the passing of energy from one species to another. But how does energy flow through an ecosystem? Energy flows through an ecosystem in only one direction. Energy is passed from organisms at one trophic level or energy level to organism in the next trophic level. Producers are always the first trophic level. Herbivores are second. The carnivores that eat herbivores, the third, and so on. Look at the diagram. These are the trophic levels. What do you mean by trophic level? It is the position an organism occupies in a food chain. Each link in the chain represents one trophic level. Trophic levels provide a structure for understanding food chains and how energy flows through an ecosystem. At the base of the pyramid are the producers who use photosynthesis or chemosynthesis to make their own food. Herbivores or primary consumer make up the second level. Secondary and tertiary consumers, omnivores and carnivores, follow in the subsequent sections of the pyramid. At each step up of the food chain, only 10% of the energy is passed on to the next level, while approximately 90% of the energy is lost as heat. So if you will look at the diagram, this one is the land food chain, and the other one is the ocean food chain. So at the first trophic level, we have grass for land, phytoplankton for ocean. We have the grasshopper at second trophic level and zooplankton for the ocean. Then we have the frog and the small fish or the quills. Then we have the snake for the fourth trophic level and the larger fish. And then of course we have the fifth trophic level or the top of the food chains. Usually these are the predators. We have the eagle and the sharks. Okay, so what is energy pyramids? The most energy is available at the producer level of the pyramid. It is represented as a triangle or a pyramid. So energy pyramid is the availability of energy decreases as it moves up the energy pyramid. Okay, so an energy pyramid is a diagram that shows the amount of energy stored in each living things of a food chain and that moves from one trophic level to another in a food chain. Okay, so how does the amount of energy change as it moves through an energy pyramid? You look at the diagram. So as it grows up, it decreases in the population size. So at the fifth trophic level, only the top, okay, the predators are there, very few. And then at the lower level, the producer level, increasing amount of available energy. So where do you think the energy comes from? It comes from the sun. As energy from the sun enters the ecosystem at the level of the producers. So the width of each bar represents the units of energy available within each trophic level. The height is always the same. The flow of energy moves through the layers of the energy pyramid from the bottom up and is gradually reduced as energy is used up by the organism at each level. So this is how it looks like. The base of the energy pyramid indicates the energy available within. So the producers, the plants, we have here the 1000 kilocalories. And then another step, we have the primary consumers. What happened to the energy? It becomes 100 kilocalories. And then goes up to the secondary consumers, 10 kilocalories. And then the tertiary consumers, 1 kilocalorie. So the energy of the pyramid lessens as it goes up. So these tertiary consumers, they need to eat a lot to supply the energy that they need. So if in one level, 10% of the energy is just passing through, so the eagle needs to eat how many animals? 10 to get 100% of energy it needs in order to live. So survival of the fittest. Eat or be eaten. Right. So the question, who needs to eat the most organisms to survive? Correct. The one at the top. They are big, so they need a lot of energy and they need to eat a lot. So now let's go to our learning target. Have we reached our learning targets for today? Can we differentiate the food chain from a food web? Can we explain what is the energy pyramid or how energy is passed through from one animals to another? So you have seen that a food chain links plants and animals in a habitat. All food chains starts with a plant or a producer. You also have seen that food webs on land and in the ocean are similar, though they differ in structure. So in the ocean, plants and herbivores are small, unlike in land. There are plants that are huge or big. Wow, so that is another scientific information from our scientific class. Another day is done. So let's eat, okay, and have a lot of energy for our next lessons. So see you next time. If you have any question, please message me in my messenger. Goodbye, grade 4 students. Once again, another scientific day with Miss Shara.